Stanford University.
Today we're very, very pleased and feel quite fortunate to have Professor Margot Gerritsen in the Department of Energy Resources Engineering. She is also the director of the Institute for Computational and Mathematical Engineering, talking to us about Jump In, the Water is Lovely. And we're very delighted that she's chosen to talk about graduate student teaching, because that is an area that this series should be talking more about. Those of you who are graduate students may feel especially strongly about that. And also because Margot's going to be talking about the teacher herself taking risks. And we know that often one of the most important elements of effective teaching actually is well-considered and prudent risk-taking, but often all of us need a little encouragement to take risks. So it's wonderful to have Margot modeling that for us. It's no accident that there's an aquatic theme to Margot's title either, considering her personal and her professional interests, and more on that in a moment. She was born in the Netherlands. For years I thought she was from New Zealand because she had taught there. And of course, as you know, the people of the Netherlands have fought a constant battle against water. She began her academic studies there at Delft University, which is the oldest and largest public Dutch institution of technology, where she completed a master's degree in applied mathematics. And I can't help but say, since MentorNet, that many of you may know about, recently sent an email out about 5 persistent myths about women in science and engineering, and one of those persistent myths that I can't believe isn't dead yet is girls can't do math. So if we need just one example, Margot can be that example. After she graduated from Delft, and to use her own succinct and wonderful words, she looked for hillier and sunnier places and ended up as a graduate student at Stanford, making it sound so easy, and you all know it's not. But she did finish a PhD here in 1997 in scientific computing and computational mathematics. And after this stint in New Zealand from 1997 to 2001 as a lecturer at the University of Auckland, she very thankfully returned to Stanford and is a faculty member here, although with courtesy appointments in other departments, as I mentioned before, in energy resources engineering. She concentrates on efficient numerical solutions to fluid dynamics problems and their engineering applications. She puts this so beautifully herself, very clearly, and her powerful and insightful approaches have lent themselves to work on enhanced oil recovery methods, coastal ocean simulations, yacht research, in case any of you were wondering about where to go with your yachts, and even pterosaur flight mechanics. And it's also led to over 80 publications in leading journals, abundant speaking invitations on campuses in the US and abroad, a Terman Fellowship, a Leopold Leadership Program Fellowship, and she is also currently a fellow at the Clayman Institute on campus. Her teaching, as you might imagine, has been equally stellar. Even though she was at the University of Auckland for only those 4 years, she was recognized as one of the top teachers in the School of Engineering. And last year, she was honored with the School of Earth Sciences Award for Excellence in Teaching. In addition, she has initiated and taught courses on teaching assistant training and presentation skills development in her department. I'm delighted to give you a top flight swimmer, whether she's wading into research, pedagogical, or literal waters. Professor Margot Gerritsen.
Thank you very much, Michelle, and thanks to CTL for inviting me to give this talk. It is always nice. You get time to talk about one of your favorite occupations, and for me that is certainly teaching. Some of you in the audience also know it's very dangerous to give me time to talk about something I love, because I can talk about it forever. So I'm going to sort of be looking at Robin and Dory here a little bit, who I'm sure will flag me if I go too far and too fast. I did want to just take a moment to say that for me, getting the recognition as a teacher here on campus is the highest award I could possibly ask for. I was extremely touched by this, and extremely touched by the invitation to give a talk here. One of the topics today is feeling a bit like a fake and feeling a bit like an imposter, which we see a lot in graduate students. Now, I feel the same right here, right now. I always feel very nervous anyway when people mention I teach courses on presentation skills just before I'm supposed to give a presentation. So, anyway, thank you very much again. So, it's one thing to be invited to give a talk about teaching, another thing to decide what you're going to be talking about. And there were many, many topics that I considered that are listed here. I thought maybe I should talk about teaching stuff I pretend to know, which is a bit in line with the topic for today. So we'll get to that anyway. But I've done lots of different teaching, very large classes, very small classes, specialized classes, undergraduate classes, classes to engineering students, classes to students in the humanities. I've done distance learning. I've done a lot of short course design, and those are all very interesting topics to talk about, as is my dog. But not about that today. What I finally thought I'd talk about, because it's really something that over the last 10 years has kept me very busy thinking about this, and very entertained also, and you will see this hopefully today, and also very emotionally involved with students, which I really like. And this is teaching first quarter grad courses. So this teaching courses to incoming graduate students, full quarter of their first year of graduate studies. Be this master's students or PhD students, they're all in here together. There's some unique challenges associated with them. There are also some unique joys, and I'd like to start with that so that you know that I really, really enjoy these courses. Here you are, you're all there on the first day. I usually teach courses Monday, Wednesday, Friday. So Monday morning, 9 o'clock, I teach one of these courses, and this is the first hour that we all spend that academic year on campus. And these students come in from all over the world. Many of them are very, very good. They are very idealistic, they are very, very eager, and they have wonderful personalities. And so it's just a delight to be teaching a class to such students. And to do that in the first quarter, when you get to know the new group, it's of course very exciting. Some faculty or my colleagues, they think that I do this so I can pick and choose. You know, I sit there and say, that's an interesting student. Maybe I should try to entice this student to do research with me. And I must admit that does happen. Not that I walk around with a little black book writing names of interesting students, but of course you have an advantage teaching in this first quarter as well. But what I really like about this course too is that it is pretty challenging, because these students go through huge changes. Now, this is true for freshman teaching as well. For graduate students, there's a couple of other challenges that I'd like to emphasize. Not just the fact that they have to get to know their way around campus and so on, and maybe they're entering a new culture, they come from all over the world, so of course those are challenges as well, but there's some unique challenges having to do with the character of incoming graduate students that makes me quite exciting teaching these courses. But let me set the scene. What sort of courses are they, and what sort of topic? Now, as Michelle was saying, I'm a bit of an applied mathematician. I like building simulation models, and the most beautiful part of building simulation models are the building blocks that you use to create them. And these are all part of a field called linear algebra. So these are matrix and vector calculations, and I love this. I know there's somebody, at least one other person in this audience, Stephen Boyd, who loves this too, because he also teaches a first quarter course on linear algebra. Now, what makes linear algebra so incredibly exciting is that gives you all these nice building blocks with very interesting, challenging, and exciting algorithms that can be used in almost any engineering or science application. And this also explains why I'm all over the place when it comes to fluid dynamics applications. I can work on coastal ocean flows, I can work on reservoir models for oil recovery, and I can work on search engine design, I can work on recommender systems. It doesn't really matter because really when you break it all down, it's all linear algebra. And so teaching this course is fantastic because I know that I'm teaching the students these essential building blocks that they need throughout their whole career. So I like it. Now, how do the students see linear algebra? So let's think a little bit about the words linear algebra. So linear is straight, direct, right? So you have a feel for that. Now, algebra comes from an old Arabic word that I don't dare to pronounce that means bone setting. And that sounds pretty painful to me. So it's no surprise that for most students, algebra has this connotation of pain. So there are two classes that I teach on linear algebra. One is at the 200 level, which is for incoming masters and PhD students in many of the engineering disciplines. And there's almost 200 students in that class. They're from all over campus. And then there is an advanced numerical linear algebra, advanced direct pain course that I teach to graduate students in ICME. And so altogether, there's about 250 students that first day jumping into a pool of pain in my courses. But the reason why and there is a specific reason, I think, why this course is challenging for them. They're all top students from other institutions, right? And you'll recognize this if you're a student here yourself. And it was the same for me. I came from Delft University, as Michelle was saying. I was the top student in my class when I graduated, and I went to Stanford. And I thought I could do math, because I had a degree in applied mathematics. And here I come to a linear algebra course on campus, which is also one of my first quarter courses. And I realized that I'm really not as good in this as I thought I was. I also realized I haven't really done mathematics for a little bit. I spent some time writing a master's thesis. I didn't really look at linear algebra for maybe about 2 or 3 years. And here you enter this class and you're rusty. Now, a long time ago, when I was very young, I did was a weightlifting instructor. And one of the things that happens there, of course, is you get people in that used to be very strong, or they still think they're very strong, and then you put them on a bench press and you tell them, let's start with 40 pounds. And then especially the men look at you and say, are you kidding me? I used to bench press my weight, right, 160 pounds or so. And they can't do it, and everybody here will say, no, of course you can. If you haven't weightlifted for a long time, what makes you think that you can, after a break, jump in and lift the same thing? It's the same with mathematics. The more I think about it, the more I feel that sports and abilities like mathematics are very closely related. You have to do it on a regular basis, and you have to keep doing it, otherwise you lose it. You have to warm up. So here are these kids coming in, thinking they're really hot shots, and coming to this class and realizing that they're rusty, and that it really takes some time to warm up before they're good again. That, of course, creates a lot of anxiety. So that's one of the challenges. But the other thing I alluded to earlier is this fact that they were all top students from everywhere in the world, and they're jumping into a pool of mediocrity. And this is extremely challenging. Now, I always tell my students, look, if you have to jump into a group, you have to be mediocre somewhere in the world. Stanford is not a bad place to be mediocre, right? I'm very happily mediocre at Stanford as well amongst the faculty. But it takes a long time to get used to that. And I think the combination of this anxiety, if I'm no longer the top student, and I'm used to that too, I used to be able to be so good at mathematics, and I see now that I have to warm up, I've forgotten things. These two, I think, will help explain some of the things I see in the class. So let me just give you a couple of statements that I often hear when I'm teaching those courses. And some of people in the audience actually have taken those courses. And I don't think that these statements come from any of you, okay? So if you see somebody who looks like a student, then just rest assured they did not come from them, right? But I hear them very often. So the very first thing I always hear when people are a little disappointed and things are hard in this first quarter is, it's your fault. And this happens particularly around midterm time. Give them back their midterm. For the first time in their lives, they have a 70 or 75. The center, the average in most of my classes, I try to put around 75%. That is a B+. And for a lot of them, this is the first time in their lives that they can remember that they received 75 out of 100. They're all used to 95 or higher. That's a huge shocker. And sometimes it's really very touching to see this. It's also very, very sad sometimes. I had one student actually faint when I gave him his script. And it made me feel absolutely terrible, obviously. But I know it's simply this adjustment period. And so, of course, I'm very motivated and challenged to say, well, what can I do to ease that process and make them aware, make them feel better? Because I think that sort of stress is really debilitating. So some of them say, well, it's your fault. They find it so difficult to deal with. I set the wrong problems. My grading is unfair. I don't give them the grade they deserve. And I say, well, I don't know, how good you were 2 years ago. I can just see what you do right now. And I talk to them for quite a while. But there are also other people that come in, and that's probably the majority. They come in with statements like this. I'm not as good as you think I must be. I'm here on campus in my first quarter, but I really don't think I belong. This is a sentiment that comes up very, very often in that first quarter. And then a lot of them, these are students that come from really good universities all over the world, have been A students in mathematics for at least 10 years. And they say, now I realize I can't really do mathematics. Now, for all those years, I thought it was reasonable. But now I failed this midterm. I'm only average. And there's this cliff I've dropped off. And very often they say, I've always suspected this would happen. I always worried that one day I was going to find out I really couldn't do it. And despite of 10 years of evidence to the contrary, they still draw these conclusions. And of course, when that happens, then the motivation goes. They get often very depressed, and it really hurts their performance. Comments like, all the other students are smarter than I am. You made a mistake accepting me. The others belong here, but I don't. And this is a really big one. I'm really scared I disappoint you. Now, this comes up a lot with students from Asia. So a lot of the students I get in my classes, especially the linear algebra class, at this entry level for masters and PhD students, at the 200 level, with the 200 students in it, a lot of the Asian students here come to me and say, I'm so worried, I'm disappointing you. The notion that they're in this class to impress me and that I would be angry with them if they don't get an A+ is a very strange notion to me, but it's a very strong emotion for them. And then I hear this, where I don't really belong here, or sometimes I hear you don't really belong here. Okay. Now, that luckily doesn't happen that often, and it gets less as I get older, but I think that's just because people are more intimidated as I look older. When I started teaching in New Zealand, there were a lot of students who said this to me, and I said, yeah, you're probably right, because I feel the same way. But this really motivated me. After teaching for a while here in those courses and hearing these things, I really wanted to understand this a little bit better. Now, I'm not a human psychology major. I'm a linear algebra person. And I couldn't find any matrices or algorithms that I could apply to this. But I thought to myself, well, let's see if I can understand this a bit better by maybe doing a survey. And I'm a big Facebook lover because I have friends all over the world. And I thought I'd just do a survey through Facebook, using connections that I have with engineering students and neurosciences students. And I did this a couple of years ago, just asking some questions and see if I can start seeing some patterns. I was also really interested in what I thought was a difference, very general, I have to be very careful here, but a general difference between the female and the male students. I must say that the statement says, it's all your fault or you don't belong here, never came in those 10 years I've been teaching those courses here from the guys. Oh, I'm sorry, never came from the women, sorry. Anyway, this is the problem here in California because everybody is, hey, you guys. So how do you know the difference, right? So they never came from the women. They were given to me by the guys. Whereas the statements, I'm afraid to disappoint you, or I think I don't really belong, or I'm not as good as you think I am, or I cannot do math, even though I have 10 years of age, they were overwhelmingly from the females. Now, I'm very intrigued by this. I didn't look at difference in countries or anything like this. This was by no means a scientific survey. I have no idea what error margins are, so don't ask me about this. This was just an informal gathering saying, am I right about this, or am I just seeing snapshots of students that are now not representative? So here I go, the Stanford survey. Okay. Well, what amazed me is that when I posted this, I had 220 responses in just a day. I mean, I posted it, I think, in the evening, and by the morning, I had 220 responses. And a lot of the people that did this sent me emails saying, wow, this is the first time that this is talked about sort of openly. And so in that sense, it helped. What I was happy about, that 80 were men and 140 were females. Bias in the population, I really don't know. I got the idea just from doing random tests that about 90% or so of the responses were really from Stanford engineering or earth sciences students. But also that I don't quite know. But from the responses, you can see this. Now, what was this survey? Again, disclaimer, because I'm not a survey creator, but these were things I was interested in. I don't know if you can read it, but I simply asked them for 10 questions or so to say whether or not the statement applied to them never, rarely, sometimes, often, or always. Okay, so the never and the always really were very, very extreme, and to my surprise, actually, a lot of the answers were extreme. And here are some. I'm afraid of disappointing my advisor or advisors or instructor. I often succeed on the task, even if I'm afraid I will not do well before I undertake it. So in other words, I'm often surprised by my own ability. Does that occur or not? I'll give you some others. I give the impression that I'm more capable than I really am. One thing I was interested in, which happens to me a lot, when I compliment a student, especially a student in their first quarter on campus, the response is always one, or very often one of disbelief. So you compliment me, you're just trying to be nice. And even if I tell them, no, I'm actually a really blunt Dutch person who usually tells things just the way I am, they still don't believe me. Right? Or they say things like, well, if Steve Boyd gives me a compliment, I believe it. Right? So this is a big one. I'm afraid that others will discover my lack of ability and or skills. Now, one thing that I realized as I was putting this talk together, I didn't ask them if they were first quarter students. But anecdotally, I do think that what I'm going to show you now is attenuated over the years. So that the more senior students, especially post-quals and after they got used a little bit to Stanford and to being average rather than being above average. Now, I always tell them in classes also, it's statistically impossible for all of you to be above average, only in Lake Wobegon, right? And Stanford is not Lake Wobegon. So let me just give you a couple of answers, and let's ponder about this. So this thing of I'm afraid to be found out, that not being as clever as you may think I am. So often and always was 43% male, 62% female, never or rarely 30% male, 15% female. Okay? Now you can do with this what you like. I'm afraid to disappoint. That I thought was really in line with what I've been seeing in my own classes. A lot of the females say always. In fact, I put the two together, often and always. But in this case, the 60% responses were almost all in the always category. So either they always think this way, or they never think this way, but it was very little spread between them. Never, rarely, very, very small percentage of the females. Also, actually, a small percentage of the male students. Again, I don't know how much they're biased. Others are more capable. Very strong feeling. Could still be statistically possible. under the male population, but under the female population certainly is not. Let's see if I have more. Oh yeah, and then I was asking the question, well, if you have such feelings, is performance affected? Because anecdotally I thought, absolutely. I see this in my class. It usually takes students 7-8 weeks before they start becoming more comfortable, and then their performance generally goes up. I always tell students in those classes, just, relax, and you will see that your performance gets better over the quarter. And there's 2 reasons for it. One is that they're warming up, right? So they become better lifters, and their brain connections are made again, and so on. But the other reason is they become more comfortable being around Stanford and more accepting of not being the top anymore, and that relaxes them. At least this is, a simple engineer explaining human psychology. But they relax, and their performance improves because they get more joy out of teaching. I really do see in my classes too that in the second half of the class there is more enjoyment in the lectures. I still give the same old chalkboard, boring linear algebra classes in the second half of the quarter, but the enjoyment level is a lot higher. And I think it's the relaxing of the students that makes that possible. Okay, so is your performance effective? And this really made me think. So both categories strongly affect performance. This was interesting that, the majority says, yes, it's negatively affecting my behavior. And the type of things that they say is, they're scared, they have avoidance behavior, they don't want to go to office hours because they're afraid that their suspicions of not being good enough will be acknowledged in office hours. They don't want that. Exhaustion is a big one. Negative impacts on personal life, very high for a lot of them, if they're in a relationship or family relationships or just enjoyment in other aspects of life. That's what they say. They can't enjoy anything anymore. There are some people that say, oh yes, it is affecting me, but it's actually positive because it just makes me work harder. But there is a big difference here between the female and the male population. And I thought that was very interesting. Now, I would like to do these surveys again informally at the start of a class, maybe in week 2 or so, and then again in week 9 or 10 and see if there are changes. And I think you will see these changes, but this is interesting. And I believe myself that this is mostly in this first quarter. So can anything be done? I asked them then. So yes, your performance is negatively affected. No, they acknowledge that. And if so, do you think somebody can help you? Can you do something? Can somebody else do something? And these were the responses. So quite a lot of the males also saying, yes, advisor, mentor, instructor can help. And I asked them, of course, how. A few students, not very many, say nothing can be done. A bit fatalistic, this is just the way it is. A lot of the males saying, I need to do this myself. I'm not going to ask anybody for help. This is a problem that I need to deal with. And when I was a student, I actually felt the same. But then some of my friends do tell me I'm a bit of an alpha male anyway. So probably sit there. But amongst a lot of the females, they said, yes, there's a really, really high percentage of the females that said, actually, people can help me with this. 11%, I need to do this by myself. 11%, I don't know, but very, very strong percentage. So then I asked, what can be done? Okay. So here are some frequent suggestions, and I try to use these to change my teaching or adapt my teaching style or my communication with the students as far as that is possible. And I thought this was also interesting. Just looking at the female students first, very, very many said, well, if I had small sort of confidence building successes and I got that given to me, be it in a class, maybe with homeworks that start off maybe a little bit too simple for the level of the class and then gradually build up in difficulty so that the final outcome is actually the level that you want, but you let us start a little bit slow so we can gain some confidence. A lot of the females said that would really help me. And this is for teaching, for advising, this was really important too. students were focusing on advising mostly, and then I asked them separately for courses as well. A really big one amongst the females, almost everybody who had problems with this said it would really help if people were open about this. So you can just imagine that I go to a couple of my engineering male or female, there are not that many female colleagues, and said, be open about your own anxieties to the students. And most of the time when I tell students that, they start to laugh because they know that they've never heard from most of the faculty here about anxiety and about stress that we ourselves have experienced. But it does occur, and I will tell you a little bit about that later. We do have this also. A lot of people, not everybody wants to acknowledge, but I know I've had it, and I know a lot of my colleagues have had it or still have it. One of my colleagues, when I first came to Stanford and as a tenure track professor, I was a little nervous because I came from New Zealand where I did well. I had tenure there and I gave it up and came here, started over again in a different field. I had never done oil and gas. I think I remember actually when I was interviewing, and before the interview I thought, oh my goodness, what do I know about oil? Well, I know the difference between leaded and unleaded gasoline, and that's about it. So I had a very strong sense of, I'm a fake, I'm an imposter, I don't belong here myself. But one of my colleagues came to me, who's a very well-established senior person leading big institute, and he says, I've always been afraid of the fake police. And I looked at him and said, what do you mean? He said, well, I'm sometimes afraid, and I have nightmares about this from time to time when I feel anxious about something, that the fake police will come into my office and say, we sussed you out, you don't deserve your PhD, give it back to me. And that really opened my eyes, say, okay, I'm not the only one feeling this way. So for me, that certainly helped, and the students say this, talk about this. Talk about failures as well. Now, very often we always talk about successes. This is in research too. I always thought it would be nice to have a journal of failed attempts. I think that would be a really nice journal where we publish all these algorithms that we thought of and they never worked, with reasons why not. And I actually think it would help research tremendously because we often go on wrong tangents and then somebody else does it again. So we're reinventing the crooked wheel over and over again. But talking about failures, it doesn't happen. When you teach something to students, right, when you think about this, and this is one of the ways I'm changing my teaching gradually, is you often present this wonderful algorithm in linear algebra, and it works great and it has all these beautiful properties. What you don't present is how many years it took the scientific community to come up with this and what they were thinking first. But no, you present it and you just basically give this impression to the students that they should understand immediately how this works, why it is so beautiful, and they get this idea that there are these brilliant people out there that write these papers, and one morning over a cup of tea, they just know how to do this. Well, that's not the way research works and not the way science works, maybe with a few people, but I'm certainly not one of them. Most of us, make a lot of mistakes as we go along. So open about that, about failures and so on, would help. With the men, most of them said, well, I want feedback, but I want honest feedback and regular feedback. Right? So say, well, just give it to me, and I'll deal with it. But a lot of them said, give me a sense of importance of the work or study. Now, in linear algebra, it's actually really easy, because I know that even if they don't believe me in full quarter, everything they see later on will have some linear algebra terms in them, and they will look back, at least that's my dream, that's what I fool myself maybe into thinking this, that they see, wow, Margot was right. Everything is linear algebra. But it's easy to see, to tell them already. But when you're doing research, they really want to have a sense of importance. And if then things don't work so well, it doesn't matter so much to them. That's the impression that I have. If they don't do so well on the course, but they know this course is ultra important, they will keep doing it, and they will enjoy it. And then the other thing that they said, which also a lot of the females said, because it's a little bit related to this, is be more involved. Now, in general, the census of these full quarter students, and that gets better again as they stay later, is that the instructors and the faculty are very much removed from them, are not interested in them so much, are not involved with their well-being. And of course, it's a bit of a chicken and egg because they feel insecure, and that's why they don't go to the faculty either, and they may interpret our behavior that way too. You know, I tend to think I'm a pretty open person, but still, midterm evaluation, sometimes again, she's not open, you know, she's distant. And you know, maybe that's the way you teach or the material, I don't know, maybe it's just impossible, you know, as a mathematics teacher to be seen as warm and fuzzy. But I still try. Okay, so what have I done with this? And also for myself, because a lot of what I see in the students now, I recognize for myself when I was a student here, my first quarter especially. I remember fights I had with TAs about points. You know, one of the symptoms of this is that students, especially first quarter, will come to you and say, you took away 2 points and I have 98 instead of 100, and that's unacceptable. That they're really worried about these points. And I did this. I'm very embarrassed to say, but I think the TA of my first linear algebra course has forgiven me because I was a belligerent, obnoxious student who always came to complain. And I think I did tell them at some point, you know, you're not doing a good job teaching me. So I've been through this. And what I try to tell students now, and this is the way I deal with things myself too, whenever I teach a new course, new material, I feel nervous about, a little bit worried about, I say, okay, I feel like an imposter. Let's put that label on it. I feel a little fake. What does it really say? So this is how I go through my mind. I say, well, it means that I'm a bit uncomfortable. I'm out of my comfort zone. And then I immediately ask my question, well, that's actually kind of nice. Being out of your comfort zone is kind of nice. It's really kind of a nice feeling. I now really like it. In fact, I get a little bit nervous now when I'm too comfortable. Because when you're out of your comfort zone, you're really stretching yourself, and I know this now. You know, and I look back on it and said, yeah, I felt extremely uncomfortable, or a little bit uncomfortable, or reasonably uncomfortable, but did I learn a lot that day? And so I learned to embrace it now. I'm out of my comfort zone, that's a good thing. And when I tell the students that and work with them and say, whenever you start feeling this, immediately make the jump to say that's a good thing. Because you can train yourself that way. I strongly believe that. Your first response is, it's a good thing. I like it. I'm stretching myself. I'm learning. So it's this thing, like embrace it and jump in. And I couldn't resist this. I love this picture. There's lots of people jumping in, but they all have their floaties on. And I don't think that's the way to do it. Now, how about my teaching? How has it changed the courses I teach? And some of these things are not immediately measurable or noticeable, but I certainly changed my own mindset. I do talk to my TAs about this. I tell them, okay, you're going to be TAing a first quarter course. Here are some of the behavioral patterns you may see in the students, and this is where I think they come from. So be sensitive to it. No. I don't ask my TAs to be counselors to the students, but say if somebody comes to you and shows signs of stress that could manifest themselves in this way or this way or this way, just think back to your first quarter. You know, they're probably suffering from some of the same things that you've suffered from. Give them a break. They will get better as we go along. Or talk to them openly about it. I've opened up in class and office hours and in one discussions about this. Most of the time when I teach the class, I tell them that this is what I think is happening here. That's okay, and it will get better. Sometimes I feel a bit like grandma there, you know, telling them, "Oh, get better. Just keep doing the course." Sometimes I talk about my courses as broccoli courses. I say, "Look, it's like eating your veggies. You know, they're not as tasty as the bacon bits, but it's good for you." And here are some other things that I found really helpful. I put grades in perspective. You know, tell them in the beginning, this is how I grade. An average in the class is a B+, and my exams are set in a way, from my own experience, that will be about 75 points. So then you have the B+. That's average, but it's average at Stanford. That's not a bad average, right? They keep reinforcing that. That's not a bad average. And I often talk, these things are said historically. So if you score 75, you're not just average for this class, but you've probably been doing pretty well, average of the last 10 years of Stanford cohorts. And these are big classes with people coming in from all over the world. It's not a bad thing to be just as good on average as these 2,000 students total that have come into Stanford, just like you, in the last 10 years. And with some students, this really helps. And then I do try to show importance and relevance of material. In linear algebra, it's easy, right? I told you that already. Also, even for those people who think, well, can I make money with this? Because, of course, there's students, especially master students, that come in and say, I want to make big bucks. Well, you just talk about Larry Page and Google. It's all linear algebra. So I showed them that. They said it's a $50 billion class, this linear algebra class. Right? You just have to get the right idea. So this is not so hard. And then the last thing I do, maybe not so much in linear algebra classes, but I certainly have been doing this more and more in other classes, and classes on fluid mechanics and so on, is I do try to give the students a sense of history of development. So, for example, when I teach fluid mechanics, there are several concepts in fluid mechanics that I actually found were difficult to understand when I was a student. Viscous shear stress, the no-slip condition. And when you go back into history and you look at what people were thinking about in the 18th century and the 17th century and the 19th century about these concepts, there were years and years of heavy debates about this. Should it be this way or should it be that way? And here we normally go and just present it. There is a no-slip condition. The velocity is zero at the boundary. And when I was a student saying, but why? I have no intuition for this. But if you give them these historical debates, then that intuition may grow and a sense of appreciation for it. And then also they're saying, oh, well, Navier-Stokes, Navier and Stokes, they were a little confused about this concept. It's okay if I am. Now, if I don't quite get it immediately, that's okay. Now, Eugene Gallup, who is the god of matrix computations, it took him a few years to develop the bidiagonalization that he used for the singular value decomposition. Now, it's okay if it takes me a quarter to get somewhere on that. And when you do that, I think it makes people feel much more relaxed. All right. Now, this is all great. But now, how about me? Because, sometimes some things get easier as you get older and you've been teaching for a while and you're past your quals. That's always what the students say, it's easy for you. You're past quals or you're past PhD or now, tenure track faculty that I mentor say it's easy for you, you've got tenure. And I have to admit, it is easier when you have tenure. But it is something to work towards. But one of the interesting things for me, thinking about this and thinking about the anxieties that these grad students face, not just in their first quarter courses, but also in research, also made me aware of some of the behavior that I have. Avoidance behavior. If I tell students, jump in, it's really kind of nice, I should jump in myself too. And one of the wonderful things for me of the last years, I think the last 10 years have really been that all the things that I've shown you and the thoughts I've had about it really helped me do the same. And to the point where I'm almost getting a little freaky in the sense that I'm constantly looking for uncomfortable things to do, which is probably why my son says I'm weird. But I love it. I just love it now. And I do this in research and I do this in teaching. So I wanted to just chat a few minutes about what I do in this. I like, as a computational mathematician, this fact that I can really apply myself to a wide area of applications. I can dive into coastal ocean, understand it somewhat after I realize it's all linear algebra, right? And I can dive into, like I said, search engines, or I can do pterosaur flight mechanics design for National Geographic and sort of look a little silly in the movie that they made out of it, but, not too silly. Now, when I realized, I said, I need to do this. So very often, every couple of years or so, I purposely look for a new application area to bide in. And in the beginning, I was really scared of it because you start reading papers and you think, well, before I get to a level where I can publish in a reasonably good journal, there will be a while. But actually, it doesn't take as long because there's so many ideas that come up in various fields, and there's so much cross-fertilization and synthesis that you can apply. It's actually a wonderful experience to do it, and it's relatively easy to go into a new field with a good math background and make some contribution. Now, I would not revolutionize these fields, but the nice thing about this process is I learned so much from it. You meet a lot of new people, and also being exposed to so many different ideas and cultures, it helps you create ideas for yourself. This is why I urge my own students to go on to many different seminars, to take courses that are not directly related to their research and really broaden their education. This is also why I'm so happy I did a PhD in the United States and not in Holland or the UK, where you do very few courses. Now, when students complain about the fact they have to do so many courses in so many different areas, they say, be very happy, you know, it's wonderful. I wish I could take more courses. So that's the one thing that I no longer shy away from. Now, how do I get into subject material? And that's related to teaching, because what I tend to do now is if I want to get into material, I first of all set myself a deadline. So I promise something. I promise a conference, we're writing an abstract, I will give a presentation about something I've done in this new field a year from now, or half a year from now. That's pretty freaky, but it forces me to get into that area. And then I usually promise to teach a course on the subject material. Now that I very often stood in front of the class saying, what did you do now? Why did you do this again? This is crazy. And you know, I don't do this every quarter, but I do this a lot. And I love it. Now what it meant for me is that I really had to accept mistakes and failure, and that I had to get away from being the perfectionist, which a lot of us are. You know, I've been very strongly applying the 80-20 rule, if you know what that is. Somebody said to me once, maybe 20 years ago, when I was a student, said, look, Margot, most people spend 20% of the time getting 80% of the work done, and then they spend the remaining 80% of the time finishing the last 20%. And I thought about this, said, well, how do I work? How do I study? How do I do research? And I realized, yeah, that's right. So if you stop at the 80% work done, and you think, well, 80% is pretty good. It's like an A minus, right? Maybe B plus in some courses. Then you can do a lot more. And the last 20%, I realized oftentimes really didn't give me much in terms of understanding of material or in terms of satisfaction. So that has been a very important step for me. So I've had a tremendous amount of fun in the last couple of years for sure, and maybe the last 10 years, just exploring this and embracing this idea of, okay, I'm a fake, but I'll love it, and I'll survive. And teaching those courses every year, and I really like teaching these 4-quarter courses, and we'll keep doing this, I think, forever. I feel now, I understand a little bit, it can make a difference. But also, every year I see this again in other people, and that is my reminder that I should do the same thing. Now, am I unique? I know there's some faculty in this. I don't think so. And I'll finish with one little story about this. Michelle said I was part of this Leopold program. And the Leopold program is a program for mid-career environmental and energy scientists. And they're selected from North America, so Mexico, Canada, and the United States. And I got very lucky that I was recommended for this. And I joined these pretty amazing colleagues at a retreat. And there are 25 of us, and we're sitting around the table one evening, and we're going around to see what should we talk about. And it was about 9 p.m. And I thought to myself, because I'd just done the survey, I thought, what the heck? I will just bring up the imposter syndrome and see how people respond. So I said, have any of you ever felt this way? You know, I sort of was very careful saying, I see this in my students. I didn't quite admit directly that I had this. And what happened was amazing, that those 25, with one exception, immediately jumped in and said, oh my goodness, you feel the same? I've always felt this way. Now, these are all pretty accomplished people. They all had tenure and so on. And they all saying the same thing, that during their career, they have felt like this very often. And I'm absolutely certain that this is one of the traits that we have. And maybe it's logical. We're all a bit obsessive compulsive. We're perfectionists. And we're always comparing ourselves to others. And maybe it's a completely natural feeling for all of us. And a trait for people that ultimately succeed in this crazy environment that we call academics, that we have this. And to me, it was an incredible eye-opener. To them, it was an eye-opener. And I know that all of us have been talking about it more on campuses. And I just hope that sharing this and thinking about it and talking about it will help you a little bit and certainly help me. And my life has gotten a lot nicer accepting it and actually seeking it out. So I hope you will do the same. And thanks for your attention. Yeah. Yes, please. Yeah, I have time.
We have a few more minutes if there are questions.
Your informal survey was very interesting. As you sort of reached the conclusion at the end, it's probably more about human nature than about first-year linear algebra students. So I'm wondering if you would do that survey in sort of other venues and see what you got. So that's the first point. The second is indulge a small anecdote. I wish I had met you a lot earlier because my very first class at Stanford as an undergraduate was linear algebra, and I contend to this day that it was the least effective professor I ever had, and I never took another math class again.
Oh, I'm sorry about that. I don't recognize you as a student. Yeah, so the survey actually was done not just amongst my linear algebra students, right? But I teach this linear algebra class that first quarter, and I certainly see it in there. And I think it's a little strengthened in there because of this nature of math that a lot of students come in and they just haven't done enough of it. And also, they've never thought about this as something they should do on a regular basis. This is another thing that I found quite interesting. When I tell students about this, what I think is a very strong analogy between fitness training and mathematics, a lot of students look at me and say, like my son looks at me sometimes and say, you're completely insane. You know, what is this analogy? But I really believe there is this analogy, and I recommend to students to do math every quarter, you know, just to make sure you do a math-heavy course every quarter. And most of the time, students that do this, they say, yes, you're right. And if I haven't done it, I mean, if I haven't done any math for a few months, because I'm doing some other stuff, I notice it. I'm not as sharp. You know, I don't see things. And I think it's the same as weight training. So this is an extra little challenge in this first quarter class that I think strengthens the other feelings. This feeling of inadequacy and not belonging, of us making a mistake, admitting them. This is one of the things I also tell them. I said, you know, actually, if you say that you don't belong here, you're really criticizing me for making the wrong decision. But I'm not stupid, you know. I can choose a good student. So trust me a little. But it takes a while for them. So.
Can I ask you a question about your 80-20 rule?
Yeah.
Perhaps reconciling it with another statement I've heard over the years. It's not that hard to be good, but it's really hard to be great. Where students that are driven for excellence, when you tell them, well, let off the pedal at 80%, how does that message resonate with drive for excellence, which we see quite a bit?
Well, there's a little bit, you have to think about what this extra 20% is. So I always say there is excellence in developing ideas, right? Proving them, making them strong. I'm 100% in that, but that's part of my 80%. The 20% that people spend a lot of time on, I find with my students and I find myself, is perfecting the way they write the paper, perfecting the plots that they create. Maybe saying to themselves, this is somehow related to something else, I should be able to find links. I mean, it's extra stuff that all of a sudden comes in because they are perfectionists and doesn't really add much to it. Okay, so the core is still the same, but that is in the 80%. And I see this very often. We know what we want to do, we have a good algorithm, and now we spend oodles of time nitpicking about things that really don't matter so much. Sometimes I think it's a form of procrastination. When I was a student and I wrote my first paper, I was so scared submitting that paper, I found a lot of extra stuff to do. You know, the plots were not quite right, the references were not quite perfect. And so sometimes I think perfectionism is a bit of avoidance behavior. You know, you feel comfortable where you are, you want to perfect it, you don't want to move on, really, because you're a bit afraid of what the judgment will be when you put it out. So with a lot of students I see this, you know, it takes them months to write that first paper, and then later they can write a paper in a couple of weeks, and it's just as good. The other thing that I tell them is that, look, if you submit a paper, for example, I think it's a really good example, and you want it to be accepted by the journal, it doesn't really pay to make that paper absolutely 100% perfect in your mind, because you're going to get a reviewer who's going to not agree with what you just spent hours on, right? And so what I tell the students, all you want is to get it through the first review, so that you get it back, say, yeah, the idea is great, now, you know, work a little bit on this and that. And you have to, sometimes I joke and say, you have to leave something for the reviewer to moan about, right? Otherwise, they're really going to try to understand what you're doing. So you leave them a low-hanging fruit, and then you prepared it already beforehand. So that's just a joke, but so that's what I mean.
So that 20% between 80 and 100 is actually, sounds like perhaps the 20% between, say, 100 and 120.
Yeah.
Is perhaps superfluous
Yeah.
in the...
Yeah,
Sure.
I feel that way. Now, it's the same with course. With course, it's a little bit different. Why do you take a course? This is what I try to tell my students. They're not taking a course in linear algebra to get 100% and impress the heck out of me. In fact, I'm not super impressed by that. I'm impressed by students who consistently do good work, but set their priorities. So I much rather have a student get 80, 85, 90 points with the 20% effort, but also take time for research and understand that they've really gotten enough learning out of this course and that there's other things that they should be doing. And the 80-20 rule, if the students applied it in the first quarter, they would be so much better off, because they come in, they want that 100%. It's very difficult for all sorts of reasons. You know, you don't always know exactly how to answer. They have to get used to my grading style. We make mistakes in grading, right? So there is an error margin anyway. So getting 100% is really not something they should strive for. They should strive to know a good chunk of learning and then move on and go do something else. Yeah. Okay? Yeah. Yeah, you're welcome.
For more, please visit us at stanford.edu.